where it holds regular meetings with energy industry reps and surrounding municipalities. It invites the industry, county, town, state, and community agencies. It allows questions to be asked. It lets the industry know where problems occur, and it lets the industry know community needs and concerns. And again, most importantly, it creates a clearinghouse for information. In New York, however, the task forces were developed after, or excuse me, in Wyoming, the task forces were developed after natural gas development was underway, so their purposes were more of a sounding board and a mediator for the local agencies and the industries to meet and discuss regularly so that both parties could benefit from the natural gas activity while mitigating the community concerns. And slightly differently in New York, because natural gas development with the modern technology hasn't really occurred in New York, the mode that these task forces are operating in are county-based, and they have similar missions where they want to assist local governments and agencies with impacts and opportunities whenever feasible or appropriate, but these communities lack the experience with the industry, and the task forces have taken an additional pre-planning role to prepare communities who have never seen natural gas development in this intensity before. So they've created websites. They started drafting road use agreements so that their local towns have some resources, because these local townships do not have the staff or the departments or the funds to do a lot of this homework, so the counties took it upon themselves to start assisting by creating some of these draft proposals. And they did proposed revisions to local planning documents, land use regulations. They contracted road analysis studies. They trained law enforcement, firefighters, and other types of sectors, and they also offered workshops, panel discussions, and informational sessions that the community could attend, as well as the development of information and fact sheets that provide certain baseline facts such as water quality to assist the local communities to prepare for natural gas development. But the key difference is that they were operating in a planning mode, and while the task forces are active mediators between the industry and the community agencies, the task forces in the southern tier will eventually have to become more active in implementing some of these and change roles a little bit from planning to mediator between the industry. But these are very effective, and there's a lot of other tools you can use, but it is very important, and this is kind of central to the communication. And I think a lot of tools like the telephone hotline kind of spin off of this, but you do need to have members of a community in the industry meeting, and these task forces allow that to happen. And all of the counties in the southern tier, like I said, they have websites that you can visit and get more information, as well as the educational institutions in the region, being Cornell University and Penn State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mission. We have a little over 10 minutes to go, and we're going to try to make the most of it. We have many questions that have been submitted. Thank you so much, and please continue to send them in. I'm going to start, Earl, if you could talk about generally, what you might recommend to the planner, and also I'm going to try to combine a couple questions here because we have received so many. If you could also talk about the political factors driving community dynamics. That was an interesting question that was raised, and it does touch on the community-industry relationship that has been talked about in this last segment.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the role of the planner is absolutely central to having a job well done for the community. I've witnessed it, I've seen it handled well and not so well. At the very front end of the process, the challenge for anyone is to confirm or determine the political will of that community. In many of the communities, I won't say all, but many of the communities in emerging natural gas markets, what you have is a fairly unsophisticated residents population. They may not be aware of the full range of impacts and issues that have been discussed in today's webinar, they may be only thinking of it as fracking or a pipeline. They may not be aware of the compressors. They may not be aware of the flares. They may not be aware of the odorants. They may not be aware of the processing station or plants. They may not be aware of the cleaning activities. And so there's, I think, a significant educational component that frankly does need to take place in order to even get to that point where you can determine political will. Separate from that, there are clearly lots of pressure points in any, we're in the election season right now, and there are lots of pressure points that come up as a result of citizen groups, NGOs, concerned residents, and the force that they are, and they should be, in their local communities. So determining that political will is an absolutely critical and important front end part of the process. I think I outlined before those things that are frankly part lawyer, part planner, looking back through what the community is empowered to do, how they can do it, how they can avoid being preempted, and how they can frankly survive if they decide to draft a new ordinance or defend an existing ordinance, how they can do that and what they have to be concerned with. And I put those things in my materials before of the challenges that we most commonly see to local ordinances and regulations. And lastly, I would say that it really is, I think, terribly important for a community when faced with a lot of complexity, even by well-meaning and sort of well-behaved applicants. It's very challenging to deal with the volume of information, the pace at which has to be digested, because the activities in the industry is different from many that a community may have faced before, particularly in the emerging markets. And I will add one last thing, and that is the community needs to understand that if one piece of the project is being proposed, that others will follow, or others will at least likely follow, and how will those be addressed, and basically how that landscape will change through time. Thanks.
Thanks, Earl. I think that was really helpful to show how complicated of an issue it is and give some good recommendations. Next, Megan, moving right along, there are two questions I think follow up to some topics you brought up. One, what types of zoning or other preparation have you seen in small communities with regard to the increased need for housing and services that come along with shale development? And also, when you were talking about the large versus small workforces in the various stages of development and the long versus short time periods, could you quantify that for the audience, please?
I don't know if there's an easy, direct answer. The communities in Wyoming, there was county zoning. However, the majority of county zoning was ag land. And in the communities in the Southern Tier region where I was working, many of the communities were rural and didn't have zoning. And on top of trying to prepare for natural gas development, we're also trying to educate communities on really what zoning is and the power and protection it creates for communities, and the lack of it makes them very vulnerable. For some of the more densely populated areas, zoning becomes important just to make sure that the new construction and development and housing that generally follows the industry, if a population stays in the area, is developing the way the community wants to develop. And that's why it's important to have the comp plan outline where you want your growth to go. But I think it's also important to, I talk to different community members and different folks interested. It's important to look at, for instance, man camp, where you want that in your community and the type of activity associated with it, traffic patterns, etc. And if you can use some of, like I said, always plan for the busts. And if you can use this opportunity to enhance the community plan that you already have in motion. If you have the west side of town where you want to have single-family residential development to occur and there's no infrastructure there, suggest the gas company put the man camp in that location, that they bring out the infrastructure and that they stub out the lines to accommodate single-family residential, that they plat the community, and then they can put the trailer houses in the man camp there that would be there temporarily, but when the industry leaves, the community has what they wanted and they didn't have to pay for it. And I don't know if that really directly answers the question, but just make sure that your zoning follows your comprehensive plan and that you look at the uses associated with the gas industry and make sure that they follow suit with how you want your zoning regs and your community to grow.
Thanks, Megan. I'm going to keep moving right along here, try to answer as many questions as we can. We have a few questions about solid waste. Now, Fred, I'm wondering if you could speak to this issue. How big of a problem is dealing with the solid waste, and how do you go about addressing that? And I'm going to combine even another question into this because I think this might be a quick answer. Overall, are the footprint and magnitude of impacts greater for hydraulic fracturing wells than for so-called standard oil and gas wells, as the question was written? Thanks, Fred.
Okay, first off, thanks for the questions. We don't really have an issue, at least in my experience here, with solid waste, and I'm not exactly sure what the questioner really intended to be solid waste. If you're on a well pad, that well pad will carry a variety of cuttings, and those tend to be reworked into the pad in some cases, or they're taken off in our area to certified disposal sites by the states, whether it's Utah or Colorado, but not specifically. The more waste issue we deal with is water, and where do you put water? Water is a byproduct of drilling, and typically that water is recycled. Often, if the pace of drilling continues, and the industry is very creative in trying to either recycle that or continue its own operations. Regarding the footprint with hydraulic fracturing versus standard, I believe every single well in the state of Colorado has been hydraulically fracked, and so we don't have the, hydraulic fracturing, or I should say fracturing or well stimulation, has been around for a very long time. This is not new technology. Certainly since prior to in the 50s and 60s. So the footprint of well sites, because of directional drilling, has grown them a little bit, but because you're able to reach out and tap different underground resources from one place rather than having a much higher individual well pad for every well. So that's been a very welcome change on the landscape in reducing those impacts, whether it's roads, dust, noise, and long-term changes to the landscape. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and we're just about out of time. I know there are many more questions submitted, so we didn't have time to answer all of them, but please see our contact information. Please feel free to contact any of us. We'd be happy to speak with you further and try to answer your questions. I'd also like to thank the panelists for joining us today, for providing your perspectives and your experiences and your recommendations. We appreciate it. We've also put together several slides of online resources for further reading. Hopefully you can find this material helpful to you and interesting. We've also noted a book coming soon next year that Erica Levine Powers is co-editing. So this will go into more detail on some of the issues that we raised today. So please keep your eye out for that. And lastly, we included our bios for the final slide so you can learn more about us. Thank you again, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar.